Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You are about to listen to an episode of the Audio Signals podcast with Marco Ciappelli. In this new season, Audio Signals is repositioning its antennas, focusing not just on the stories, but on the storytellers. In our modern hybrid analog-digital society, the art of storytelling has never been more vital or displayed such a diverse array of forms. Recognizing this, our conversations will spotlight the narrators, providing a unique exploration into the minds behind the narratives. From authors to podcasters, visual artists to songwriters, and everything in between, we will engage with all who contribute to this extraordinary tapestry of human experience. We are all made of stories, after all.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Audio Signals. That's my second podcast, which I love as much as my first one, but it's something a little bit different. So in Redefining Society, I talk about technology and society, and Audio Signals, I talk about stories and storytelling, but we're all made of stories. So even in the other podcast, I tell stories. So I know it's a little confusing, but we'll get there. Audio Signal is dedicated for those of you that listen for the first time to understanding what inspires story, how it's written in story, what is the audience that you have in mind when you write a story. But the story could be music, a song, can be a painting, can be an illustration, can be a movie, can be anything, but often is a book. So today we're talking about a book as well, and the person that wrote this book. And I'm very excited, before I introduce her or welcome her to the show, is the fact that we're going to talk about historical driven sci-fi, which is already a mouthful right there. But it's exciting because I love thinking about time machines exist, and at least with our imagination we can use it or kick it like they do in the movies sometimes to make it work, and if they find the plutonium or whatever you need, uranium, to make it work. And but we can always use our imagination. And but I know that there is a lot of research if you want to do a really good historical inspired sci-fi fictional story. So enough, I'm not the one that wrote this book. The one that wrote this book, it's Katherine Benfante, which is here. If you're watching the video, you already saw her with some beautiful greenery that she'll tell us what it is in the background. And for those of you listening, here she is. Katherine, welcome to the show.
Hi, Marco. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So I already talked my 2 minutes, so the rest of the show is yours.
Oh boy.
No, I'll help you with the conversation. So let's start with who you are, and also tell me about those plants in the back.
Sure. My name is Katherine Benfante, and I'm coming from nice cold New Jersey today, but I keep warm here. I think to do the best job in the world, which is to write stories. I just make up things and people read them, which is a pretty cool way to live a life. But I'm sitting here. We call that room the library because that's where we keep all our books. But also there's plants in there. We grew some coffee plants. We do bonsai. And I'm not the one with the green thumb, but I just kind of water things and kind of prune. And I get to enjoy the fruits of our labor, so that's fun. But what I like to do is I like to write, and I'm a mom. First of all, I have 2 young kids, and so I read a lot. I get to read some kids fiction, but mostly I read adult fiction, and that informs everything that I write, I think. And before I was a mom, I was an engineer, actually, and I went to school up in Montreal, and I speak French. Not perfectly, but I like it. That did make its way into my book, which is Scattered. It takes place in Montreal. And I love to write. When I was growing up, I was always writing. And I was the kid who would get a 10-page writing assignment, and all the kids were moaning because it was 10 pages, and I handed in a 60-page story. And my teacher said, you should think about being an author one day. So I decided to give it a crack after I had kids. I thought, well, all right, maybe I'll try this as a second career. So I'm trying it.
I think that never goes away. I can talk from a personal perspective. I'm now like into some short stories and actually writing some kid story with my mom, which is another story on his own because she just started.
Oh, good luck.
76. And we already wrote some together. Her idea. So anyway, we're not talking about me, but the point is you postpone and postpone. Are you ever ready to write the story? It's always, to me, seems to write a book, it's such a big, daunting adventure that it's the size of it for me. And on the other hand, you said, yeah, sure, you want 10 pages? I'll give you 60.
Yeah.
So let's go with that.
Well, everything seems possible when you're young, I think. But as you get older, you just have to take things bit by bit or, just bit by bit. You write a page, then you write a chapter, and then, okay, that's not so bad. I'll write another chapter. Then pretty soon you get 50,000, 100,000 words and you have a book. You just have to, but I think planning helps, first of all, so you know where you're going and don't get stuck. But just making a habit of it really helps. I get up at 6 a.m. every day, which isn't that early, but no one else is up. And I just turn on the coffee machine. I sit in the dark with my screen glowing and I write. And that works for me. And I love it. I love that time of day and I get a lot done.
Well, it sounds like you're a morning person. A lot of writers are actually a night person. At least some of them that I talked to, they are. Let's talk about the genre that you're writing. So Scattered is a story that is sci-fi, but it is inspired by an historical figure. And,
yes.
And we were talking before we started recording on how it's hard to decide where you draw a line or where you bleed one into the other. But you also said, there is a lot of planning, a lot of research. So what is the process? Do you start with the creative idea, the fantasy idea, and then you plug in the reality, or you go the other way around?
Everyone has a different process, I think, for how they begin a book. This particular idea came to me when I was literally washing dishes and my mind was blank. And all of a sudden I had this idea and I was thinking about this physicist from the early 20th century. And his name is Ernest Rutherford. He's from New Zealand. And he was the chair of physics at McGill University, where I went to college. And so I knew about him. And I just had this idea, what if he was in his lab and his daughter, and at that point I didn't even know if he had a daughter, what if one of his experiments went awry and his daughter was sent in the future 100 years? And then I finished washing my dishes and I thought hard about it, and a plot just came into my head like it fell from the sky. And then I started researching because I knew about who he was just generally. He was a physicist from, like I said, the early 1900s. He was the one who discovered the nucleus of an atom. And before that, the atom was thought of as like a chocolate chip cookie. And the dough was, the positive charge, and the chocolate chips were the negatively charged. They didn't even know that they were electrons at that point. They just knew that the atom had to balance. And so Ernest Rutherford discovered that there's a very, very small positively charged nucleus in an atom. That's all I knew about him. So I started my research and I figured out he did have a daughter. And I read as many biographies of him as I could, and including one of them, which was a collection of his letters that he wrote. And I recommend anyone who wants to write about a historical figure, find something that character has written, because you can find their voice. You find out all these tiny details about them, like, the fact that they might like tea, or they like reading detective novels, or they hate the beach, or just these strange details that really bring a character to life in ways that it's almost natural for us when we're talking about someone. We provide those details. But when you get to do that sort of, the first person research, those come out naturally and organically, and it's authentic. And for me, I kept the characters as authentic as I could. I took Ernest Rutherford and I took his daughter, who in reality was not born in 1886 as I placed her in my book. She was actually born about 1901. The only thing I did was I moved her birth date a little bit, but I kept her as authentic as I could. I kept her father and all of his research assistants, his knowledge of Einstein and the Curies and such, included all those details. The only thing is I just threw her in the future, just a small change from reality. But everything else I kept authentic. I mean, I was just extremely, to the point of almost driving myself crazy, but like the moon phases, I kept the same. I went back and looked at a perpetual calendar, and just these small details, I think it made it a very rich setting. And I know of some authors who don't do that, and their setting feels just very anachronistic. And there's something, from a book is set in the 1600s, and you read a detail that is 200 years out of place. And you just have this feeling, it takes you out of the book for a moment because you feel like the author didn't do the research. So I wanted to make sure that didn't happen with my book. And I think that's very important.
Is it inspired by a passion that you have for a certain kind of literature or reading? I mean, I know you're an engineer. So I'm imagining it's either easier for you to be logic about things, but then you go and throw time travel. All right, cool. We went. Then again, you got Asimov and you got those guys out there that come up with incredible things. But yeah, I mean, was it something that you read or a movie that you watched and you said, I would like to write something along that line?
It's a good question. I personally read a lot of different genres. I like history nonfiction. I like historical fiction, science fiction, spy thrillers, actually, fantasy. I read a lot. And I think you tend to write what you like, but also everyone has an imagination. Everyone has creativity. And if you relax your brain enough, I think you let that come out. And that's where the idea for a time travel story came to me. I wasn't consciously setting out to write a science fiction novel or time travel or something with a historical figure. It's just you write what comes into your head, I think. For some people, maybe they're very regimented about that, but it just happened that way. And you're right, I am very logical, very, very regimented. And so that's, I think, why I was very meticulous in the research. And I think a lot of writers who are historical fiction authors are as well, because that's a passion for them. A lot of people like history. Not everyone does. I do happen to like history. I think you can learn a lot about ourselves when you look into the past, because people don't really change all that much. When you get right down to it, what people want and what they strive for, same thing over and over. People want love, they want power, and they want security for their kids, and that's same themes over and over through history. So I found that to be very true when I was writing this as well, and when I was researching Rutherford and what I imagined he would have wanted for his daughter who was time traveling.
How does she time travel? By mistake? Does she just open a door?
It was a mistake. Yes. So, I mean, obviously, if we knew how to time travel, we would be doing some pretty fun things right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think, all right, well, you need and I researched this as well with some physicists. How could you theoretically time travel? And you need a very large gravity field. And, you kind of bend space-time. You might need a very high electricity source. And her father...
Or a DeLorean.
Or DeLorean. Right. Well, if you're not Doc Brown, how do you manage this? So this girl, Ellie Rutherford, she stepped into her father's lab which was very messy at that time. There were wires everywhere. Lots of magnetic fields were created from that. And also, he was running an experiment that used radium, and radium is radioactive. And so it emits various kinds of radiation, alpha, beta, and gamma rays. And so there was just a confluence of electricity, magnetic fields, a high voltage electrical source, and this radium. And she just touched the wrong thing at the wrong time, and poof, she found herself 100 years in the future.
Go figure.
I won't say it's magic, but because it doesn't exist, we sort of have to create that situation.
So I like that. I like the idea that you don't have to explain much. I like the idea that there is a concept, but then I don't have to explain how the wizard magic in school magic in school exists, or why a hat it's sorting you in in Gryffindor.
It just does.
It just does, and I like that. I love the Alice in Wonderland. I like the nonsense. I like all of that.
Right.
And then I read bio. I read real historic, and I want there to be perfect. But where do you draw the line, and how do you choose? And that may be a very hard question for you, but how do you choose your audience? Meaning, you're writing the book and you say, all right, this is not going to be for the person that just want just to read historical stuff. And this is probably not going to be for the one that want to hear only stories about completely fictional character. And yet you have to tune it. And that's where I'm picking your brain here, because I personally wouldn't know if I'm adding a little bit too much of this or a little bit too much of that, and then it explode, or maybe it's not going to appeal the audience that I have in mind.
That's a very good question. I think no matter what you read, you want to be entertained. Even when I read nonfiction, if that book is dry, if the author doesn't bring it to life, I'm going to put it down, even if I like the subject. And no matter if you are more into science fiction or you're more into romance novels or historical fiction, you want to be entertained. And so I personally tried to create an entertaining story, but you have to include details that make it believable and that fill out your setting and round it out. And so I think part of your question was, where do you draw the line on how accurate you can make things? And sometimes you will read something and you know that it is false because you've read something else from that time period, and some of the facts in that historical fiction book are wrong. And so you go on an internet search and you look it up. And as a reader, that always annoys me, because I want to know that the historical novel that I'm reading is based in fact. And so I think you want to entertain people, and you have to take liberties with the if you're using a historical figure, you should take some liberties with their life, like keeping them in the spirit of who they were. You have to create an interesting plot, otherwise you might as well just be not even bothered to publish, right? But what I did, and what I love what other authors do, is I put an author's note at the back where I talked about what was real in the book and where I took liberties. And I did in just a few places. I did take a few liberties, but I explained about the science behind it and the science in the modern characters too. And then I included a couple pictures at the end to show that, hey, this really was definitely a real person. I'm not pulling your leg, and this is how it was. And I love it personally when I see that in book, or when I see maps. I love that. It's grounding.
Like you've been building your own environment and your own world, which is very difficult to do as well.
It is,
and be relied on that for maybe the second and the third story, and and all of that. But another part of my question was, you probably have the ideal reader in your mind, and my background is it's branding and marketing. So I'm always like, how are they going to perceive this? What's my target audience? And and that's really bad, I think, for the writing part when there is not a product that you need to sell. Or so are you get to a point where you're like, well, I feel like my audience is not going to go for this, even if I do want to go for this?
Marco, that's a really good question. And I should have thought of that before I started writing this book, because I created something that is hard to market. And I thought, every author thinks, everyone's going to love this book. Well, that's not true. Like every product, there is a very specific audience. And I did not keep that in mind necessarily. And so I'm left with something that has some sci-fi, and it has some historical, and it has it has a love story too. It's not a romance book, but even if you read A.J. Riddle or Blake Crouch, they have a strong love thread throughout them too. So I thought, okay, even though it's science fiction, though, there's probably only going to be females, maybe 20 to 40 who will read this. Turns out that a lot of males like it too. But there are a lot of older women do too. And I never thought that it would appeal to them, to those sections of society. And so I think even if you try to write to a specific audience, you will be surprised at who picks up the book, and you just have to roll with it.
That's a good point. And as long as maybe in the end, it's what the real artist does. You do it to yourself. You do it because it's something that you like to do. And
otherwise, you'll constrict yourself.
Exactly. So, yeah, my question was a little bit tricky, because I feel I'm always pulled from just do what you want to do, or because of, again, how my mind works is, okay, who am I telling this story to? Do I need to dumb it down? Do I need to bring it up to the tech part? And is this like this sci-fi people, or they want just more romance? But in the end, I think you did the right thing. I mean, you wrote something that pleased you, and then you find out that people that you didn't expect, they are actually liking the book. So tell me about the romance part in this story.
Sure. So there's a female. She's 20 years old, and at the beginning of the book, it starts off with her very close to entering an engagement with someone who in real life she does marry, and she doesn't want to be with that person in the novel. And she's an intelligent person and feels restricted in 1906 because let's face it, there weren't opportunities for women like there were today, obviously, to study. And I go into some detail to explain why she can't go into various fields of study. And when she is transported to 2006 Montreal, she discovers what a difference it is in terms of opportunities for women. And that's one of the things that really appeals to her. And she meets someone who doesn't see her as an object, sees her as a female with a brain. And that's William Hertz, and he is a physics grad student. And he appeals to her because he's a physicist, and she's obviously very interested in that. And so they strike up a friendship, but she does reveal that she's from the past. He's the only person that she tells. And so he knows her secret, and he agrees to help her try and get home and to recreate this set of circumstances in her father's lab that sent her back. And so there's this funny dynamic there because they're friends, and they find out that they really like each other's company, yet she's trying her best to leave him. And so there's repression of feelings, and I'm not going to give away the end, but it does affect her choices and what she does, and him as well, how he helps her. And it's a funny dynamic of like forbidden attachment. But it's very clean. It's a very clean thread.
Now it's interesting that you have the story of trying to get back, and I'm wondering, the first thing that comes in my mind is, I know you're always going to go back to where your origin is, but didn't you find a better a better place to kind of become who she wanted to be? So why going back?
Well, that's a great question. You'll have to read to find out what happens.
Okay,
I can't spoil the end, but yeah,
See?
that's definitely a pull because yeah, I really enjoyed researching what females went through at that time, and I found this great quote from. It was actually from 1915, but looking back about 10 years prior, of women who had graduated from Barnard, and these were very intelligent women, had a lot of work and time put into their studies, and then they married and they became housewives and had children. And they talked about how their lives were very fulfilling personally, but they always felt like there was something missing. They felt like they had wasted part of their life because they never did anything with the education that they received. And I found that a bit tragic. And so that sort of informed what Ellie Rutherford's outlook on life was. So, yeah. And I mean, there are women nowadays who feel like that too. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because there's a lot of ways you can get fulfillment in life. But yeah, that quote really stuck with me.
And I guess the reason why I ask you that question is probably the one of the driver of the whole book. So, because it's a struggle about her wanting to go back. So,
Yeah.
that's already telling me how I could probably get into this book myself. How much of that is representing your life, or at least your vision about the world? And I mean, of course, you're a woman, you are an author, but you're also an engineer. I know you work for a military Navy project, so you kind of achieve at this point your scientific career, your science and engineering career, and now you got kids, and now you're writing. It's kind of like came to full circle from that 60 pages story that you wrote when you were in school.
Yeah. I guess it did inform it, and I never really thought about that too much. But I studied engineering. I never wanted to do anything trivial, and I don't mean that as a knock on other things, but I really liked science. I actually wanted to be a race car engineer. That's why I studied mechanical engineering, and then I realized that you can't really have a family life very easily if you're going off to racetracks every weekend or every other weekend. So I decided to pursue something else, and I just fell into military engineering, and I really liked it. It was a lot of fun. Got to meet a lot of great servicemen doing it. Got to fire a tank gun. Who gets to say that? That's pretty awesome. In training, obviously. Not training, but testing, I should say. So yeah, I got to fulfill part of that interesting life, and I think, that's something that I think my character wants to achieve too, is to say that you have done something to affect society. Everyone wants to do that. Yet at the same time, what's our job on Earth? We continue our species. So yeah, of course I want to have a family. And not everyone wants to, but that's always been a big drive for me. And yeah, that plays into my character as well. She would never turn her back on that, even no matter what she would want to achieve. So I guess I would see a lot of myself in that character. Never saw that before. So thanks, Marco.
You're welcome. I'm being a shrink right now. I'm going to go with something else, which I like to ask. I mean, you said that you love writing. You've always thought about that. You did that as a younger student, a young person, and then, you take other choices. And I'm assuming you're still writing on the side. You have always a creative, either you publish it or not, you write a book. But I think when you're a writer, you're a writer. Even if you're writing a post, like a card for a happy birthday, I think if you're a writer, you can kind of tell. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Unless nowadays you use ChatGPT, but that's a different story. We're not going to go there. Although I talk a lot about that. A hard pass on that. I'll talk about that on my other show. But where I'm going with this is the legacy. Why do we write a book? So why do we write this story? Why do we make a movie? And is it on a selfish fulfillment that you want to kind of be a celebrity, or is it something because you kind of mentioned that you want to change somebody's perspective maybe on life, you want to contribute to something? So my point is, what drives you in writing and put those words on paper or audio and nowadays on the internet, and it's probably going to be there forever and ever and ever. So
and ever and ever.
Be careful on what you say right now.
Oh God, yeah, don't you ever. Yeah, it's hard not to self-censor yourself online, and even in some of my writing, that is true. But so, I mean, it'd be great to make a living as an author. That would be great, but that's not really why I write. I just write because I have stories that just come into my head, and you feel like they have to get out. And so I've talked about this with my husband sometimes. I said, don't you just have this fantastic idea and you just have to talk about it or write about it? And he said, no, I don't feel like that at all. And I always think that everyone is the same way.
I'm not that weird. Yeah.
No, he's creative in other ways, but I just have to write, and some people just have to paint. And I get that. My daughter's very musical. I can't even read music. I can barely sing. So for me, it's writing, and I can't stop. And I did take a break for a while in college, and I wasn't writing. I wrote a little bit during one summer vacation, and then I picked it up after I graduated and I started working. And you can't bottle it up that long if you're creative. And I've written a couple of different genres. I've written some kids fiction, and not all of it's published. Not all of it will be published because some of it is just not good enough. But you can't stop. And I have a book that I'm about 75% through writing right now. I have 2 other books that I want to write. I think a sequel to Scattered, and then something else. And I can't decide what I want to write first. And that is the best problem to have, really, right? And once that spigot opens, you can't really turn it off. And you probably shouldn't, because it's what makes you happy. That's how I feel.
And what do you want people in your mind, when people read a book, what do you want them to be left with? I don't know. I just tell you, for example, I do the podcast because I want to make people think. That's my thing. I want to have amazing conversation with amazing people, and if people listen to us, I want them to question more things than when they started. So I'm not trying to give an answer. So that's what makes me tick, to have this conversation. So what do you want when people put down the book? Be like, oh, I really had a good time, or wow, I have a different perspective on things. What?
Well, first of all, because this book, Scattered, is science fiction, and the work that I'm writing right now is also science fiction. It would be nice if people came away learning something new, and I hope to have done that with this book. I know I did. I know some readers glossed over the physics in it, and they said, oh, I still really enjoyed the book. I just turned about 2 pages when you started talking about the science. And that's fine. But that's one thing. But one thing that I didn't really expect to have gotten from this is just some sort of heartwarming interactions between people, and what makes us tick, and what makes us make decisions, and what pulls us to do things. And it's always someone else. You can't really live a solitary existence. And one of my favorite parts of writing is writing conversations. And I didn't really figure this out until, I don't know, 8-9 years ago, but that is the easiest part for me to read. And I love putting those words in people's mouth and just finding out how they interact with each other. And I've come back and found these golden nuggets of pull quotes of what they say that just kind of tug at your heartstrings. And I never set out to write that, but I'm finding that really resonates with people, and it resonates with me. I'll look back and I'll say, wow, I wrote that. Wow, that's a good line. I should remember that. And I've never quoted my own book to someone, but I have quoted it in my head, and I thought, oh, that's good advice about how to deal with someone or how to talk with someone. So yeah, I hope they take that.
That's really cool. So you kind of mentioned your next project, which is still into the sci-fi realm.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you pick your next project? Again, are you just doing the dishes again and something strike?
That always helps. Going on a walk, doing dishes, in the shower, that's when the best ideas come. Especially when you have no pen or paper, that's when the ideas really come.
Right.
No, I have a Word document and I have maybe 40 story ideas on it. And whatever speaks to me, I will write next. Like I met a bunch of really good authors on X, formerly known as Twitter. There's a hashtag time travel authors, great group of people. And I got invited to contribute. Yeah, Twitter is best for connecting with like-minded people. So I got invited to write a short story for an anthology, and I wasn't sure what to write. And I went to my Word document, and I looked for something, and something stood out to me, and I modified it into a time travel story. And so, that document saved me.
I love that. Can I keep you another extra minutes because we're at 35, and I usually kill it here, but I'm having a good time, and I'm doing it for a very selfish reason because I'm asking you a question that I often have in my head about writing. You went into the short story, and I don't know, lately I just love short stories, and to write, even if Mark Twain say it takes longer to write a short letter than a long one, and I apologize for that. I feel like I can get that fix. Maybe it's the podcast, some dramatization on the radio. I'm a big radio fan. And sometimes because I can kind of get it done while I walk the dogs. And, I've read big, long books in pieces, of course. But the idea of writing it, how do you approach that? And do you feel the same fulfillment maybe when you write a short story? Or what's the difference between writing an old book with time travel, one thing, romance, and many, many pages, and just say, I'm going to get it done in a short story?
It is a very different feeling, but at the same time, it still has to have all the elements of a strong plot. You have to have a hook. You have to build up to an event. Otherwise, what's the point of reading the story, right? You have to have a good, an inciting incident. And then there has to be barriers to the main character to solve the problem. And then there has to be a resolution. Or there should be, or your readers will be pretty annoyed. But it's challenging because you have to say that in a small amount of space. You have to be succinct, and you still have to create a setting that's believable and round out your characters. So I find it to be a really big challenge, honestly, and it's a good challenge. But you can't just tell a snippet sometimes you can tell a snippet in time, like flash fiction can be very good, 1,000 words or less. But it always leaves me wanting more whenever I read flash fiction. But with a short story, I feel like I want to see that complete. Okay. So good short stories are not deep enough, and you don't feel like it either wasn't resolved or just not enough happened. But a good one has all of those elements. Like Stephen King is pretty good at his short stories, but really they're more like novellas. Well, some of his are short stories, but he's kind of an expert. So
he's crazy. You're right. I was actually watching a video where Martin interview him and say, how the hell do you write all of that? It's like you write a book in what it takes me to write 3 paragraphs. And it's like, I don't know, I just take it as a job. And I just watched it the other day, I think, on Instagram. But could you have done Scatter in a short story format?
No. No. In fact,
you didn't even have to think about it. No.
Oh God, the first draft is almost 140,000 words. So I had to cut a lot as it is.
Wow. But can you give us, to end this, an elevator pitch for people to read it? If somebody said, tell me what it's about, why should I read it?
Sure. So, Scattered is first and foremost a time travel science fiction novel, and one woman is faced with a very difficult choice. Does she try to adjust to a new time period and fulfill her dreams, or does she go back and be reunited with the family she loves? And also an uncertain past that she can read in the history books, which does not have the opportunities that her future modern life could. And it's a choice no one wants to face, but the way she does it is pretty compelling.
Very cool. Good elevator pitch. And there's time travel, so I think everybody's fascinated by time travel anyway. So
I am, yeah.
Well, a lot of TV series, a lot of movies, a lot of books, and I think this is fascinating. I want to thank you so much for your time and going the extra 5 minutes. We kind of like kicked the time machine a little longer to stay here a little longer, but it's time to go back to where we belong. And I invite everybody, of course, to read the book and to get in touch with Katherine. There is going to be, for people watching, that's the book, and for people listening and anybody else in the note, there'll be a link to the book and to Katherine's website and to get in touch with her. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And again, as I say during the show, I hope you have questions or maybe get inspired about writing yourself. And if you have some story to share, just stay tuned or let me know. And if you like to listen to stories, subscribe to this podcast. And Katherine, thank you very much. Good luck with your next adventure.
Thanks for having me on, Marco. It was a great talk.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Audio Signals with Marco Ciappelli. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then add this show to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to connect your brand to our conversations and our audience, visit itspmagazine.com to learn how to sponsor one or more of our shows. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.